Hi guys, it's me Udus Saraswat. Welcome to another video. In today's video, we are going to learn about REST API. What does REST stand for? How we can call a REST API using Postman. So all those things we will be looking into today. So let's get started. So guys, REST stands for Representational State Transfer. So in REST, we are having two concepts. One is client and server. So let us understand that first. So what is client? Client is a browser such as Chrome browser views or Firefox. So client is a browser and server is something which is hosting data. So that server will return us data. So these two need to communicate. This client and server, that browser and that server which is hosting data needs to communicate with each other. So how it is going to happen is REST is the one who will help them to communicate with each other. So REST provides standards between them to communicate. So if they want to communicate properly, some standard has to be defined that that client will say, I will send a request in this particular format and you send me response in this particular format. Then only they can be able to communicate properly. So those standards are provided by REST. Okay, and so there are three main features of REST. First is the separation of client and server, which we discussed right now. That client and server are two different entities which want to communicate between them, and those standards are provided by REST. Second is statelessness. So REST is a stateless system in which every request is an independent request. It does not depend on the previous request which has been sent. Every request is a separate and standalone request. So there are some system in which a sequence of requests has to be sent. After only that we can have a proper communication. Like if we want to send new request, then whole sequence has to be sent. So that thing is not there in REST. Every request is a standalone request. Third is cacheable. In REST we are having an option in the header where we can set it to cacheable as true, and then the client is allowed to cache that particular response and then use the same response again and again. So how that communication is going to happen between the client and server, let us have a look on that. So there is an HTTP verb. So like that we are having different HTTP methods in REST. So those methods we will be calling, and using that we will be making a request. So an HTTP verb such as update, add, delete, those we will be looking into later in the same video, and a header. So in header we will be having some details like what format you want to wish. Like if you're using a mobile phone and you're using a Windows system laptop, so in both of them the screen resolution will be different. So that particular detail we can send in headers, and a path to a resource. So a single server may be hosting several endpoints. So we will be having a specific path if we want to get a specific data back. So that is there, and a message body can be there if we want to, let's say, add some data. If that let's say a user want to register somewhere, so that client, the browser, will be sending that user details to the server. Okay, that this is the user details. You update that in your system, so that communication is going to happen that way. Okay. So coming to the next slide, what is an API? So APIs are mechanisms that enable two software components to communicate with each other, such as it will define the set of definitions and protocols. So how it will be happening is that we will be having two software systems. Let's say software 1 and software 2. So those two need to connect with each other. So how that connection is going to happen, we will have to define a new class or something where that connection we will make possible, such as it can be a method, it can be anything which allows both of them to connect. So that is called an API. So if we are using AWS SDK, software development kit, so in that particular, we can say, library, we can say we are having different methods. Using those methods we can interact with our software, our microservice to the AWS services. So that is how an API works. Now, what is REST API? So in REST API, we know that there is a client and there is a server. So in between, what is going to happen? That client is going to make a HTTP request, such as GET, POST, DELETE, and PUT. These four are the main HTTP methods which we are having in REST system, and there will be a URL. So like we discussed, there can be that the server can host several endpoints which will be having different data according to the requirements. So that URL will be defining, okay, that this request has go to this particular endpoint. For example, we are having /service 123 some ID. Like that we are having different URLs. So using those, that particular server will be called. That particular endpoint in the server will be called, and then the server will be sending back a response to the client. So that response will be a JSON mostly. We can also have a XML response, but JSON is what in the REST world we use. So like that, a JSON response is sent back, which is having survey ID, score, message, and response. So like that, a response is sent back to the client, and then in the client there will be a UI which will be showing this particular data in a table format or something. Okay, and what are the HTTP methods or REST methods we are having? So there are CRUD methods, C, which we say CRUD, which stands for C for create, R for read, U for update, and D for delete. So for these four basic operations, we are having four HTTP methods in REST system, which is post, get, put, and delete. These methods we will be using when we will be creating a REST APIs. So if we want to add a particular data to the database, in those case we are going to create that particular record. So we will be using post, and if we simply want to get the data back, we will be using the get method. And if say that we have already created a particular record, and now we want to update some fields, let's say user email ID we want to update, so that will go up to, in this third case, update, we will have to use put HTTP method for that particular case. And if we want to delete that particular user, we will be using delete HTTP method. Okay, so let us first go to Postman and see how an API looks like. So this is a REST API which is hosted in a, which is a sample REST API. So if we want to get a sample REST API, we can go to Google and we can type sample REST APIs. Okay, so let us go to this Postman website. So once we go here, it will show us a list of APIs. So if you can see all these APIs, so let us go to cars and make of cars. Okay, so it will give us the API. So this is a particular API link. If we call this particular URL, then we will get the data of back, which is makes of cars. So it will give us a JSON data back. Okay, from here we can get this particular URL and we can paste that in our Postman. So I have also pasted one. So what will happen if we are going to hit this? So this is a Postman. So instead of using a Chrome browser to make URL request, we can use Postman. If we want to do testing, this is the interface that Postman provides. It will, we can create new APIs, like this is a get API call. We can create, like right click over here and we can click on the plus symbol and we can create one more request, add request, and we can add a request like post request. If you, like we discussed, post, put, delete, like that we are having, we can create a post request as well and we can add those details over here. So let us look at the get for now. So this is a get request. We pasted that particular URL from that website to here and we change this method to get. And now let us, so this is a query param. So this particular thing is a query param. We will be looking into this, what query params and path params are when we will be creating a get API. Okay. So for now, let us look into this, like how it is working and what response we are getting back. So let us click on send. Okay, so once we hit on send, we, what we can see is we got some body back. So this Postman is a client and this URL is hosted in a server. So this client make a request to this particular server and that server send back a response which is having a body. Okay, this is the body which is having a count and message response returned successfully, and it is having some details such as Tesla car manufacturers, about the different car manufacturers. It is having those details, Aston Martin, all those things. It is having. The other thing we can notice over here is we are getting some code back from the server, which is 200 in this case. Okay, we will be looking into this, like what different codes are for which purpose, and we can see what time that particular request has took. So it took around 1.5 seconds. And what is the data this particular request took? So around 4.6 KB it took. So what this 200 means? Okay, so let us have a look on that. So there are some standards, like we discussed, REST provides standards for the client and server to communicate properly. So it has also defined some response code such as 200, 201. So they are defined for different purposes. For example, if we in our case we got 200 back, so 200 means okay that the standard response was successful HTTP request, that the request you send has been successfully processed and you got the data back completely. Okay, so that is used for, that is the meaning of that 200 response code. And if we are getting 201, so in some cases we will be majorly in the cases of post API we will be getting 201. So what this 201 means, that the request, let's say you want to add a user, so the user details you send to the server and that particular user has been successfully created. So in that case that server will be returning a response of 201. Similarly, there is other response codes like 204. If there is no content, let's say if you hit a particular URL and there is no content to return back, it just takes your request and process it. So it will send us back a 204 response code. And let's say you in the request you send something wrong, which is invalid. So let's say if you are hitting the URL, it is taking ID for itself. Like if you want to fetch some card details and you are giving ID for it, and let's say you gave some ID, okay, it's some invalid ID. Like ID should be an integer and you give ID as a string. So that is a case of bad request, and that server will return us a 400 response code back to the system which is calling that. And 403 forbidden we get when we are not having permission to access that resource. So let's say the resource we are hitting, the URL we are hitting is having some security token enabled, and we are not sending that token with it with our request. So we will get back 403 forbidden as the response code, that we are not allowed to call that particular API and get the data back from there. And 404 not found is that is the case when we are sending some ID which is not there in the database, in this which is not present in the system. In that case the server will return us a response of 404. And 500 internal server error is for unexpected failures. Let's say we send some details and something like memory overflow or something happened in the server and the server crashed. So in that case we will be getting 500 back as a standard error. So those, that is all about the response codes we are having in REST. So that is all about the response codes that are there in the REST system. So I hope you guys are clear with all these things, how REST API works, what is REST API. So that's it guys for this video. If you are having any doubts, ping them down in the comment section. I will be looking into them. So till then, see you in the next session. Bye bye.